Okay, so welcome to this video. So as you can see from the title, this video is all around bench press technique. Now, going forwards, I am going to start putting more content out on YouTube again. I want to upload at least every 2 weeks, if not every week, and I want to provide a range of things. I don't want to just post my training, which I will continue to post and talk through, but I also want to be posting stuff around technique breakdown and also programming as well, because I think it's just a bit more interesting, and there's not tons of content around there, especially on YouTube, of current lifters and what they do. So I think it's just interesting to put that out there, and it's just something a bit different and it's fun for me. I prefer putting more long form content out than short form, so that's why I decided to use YouTube. Now, this video, it won't cover everything. I'm going to preface this by saying I could have gone into so much more detail, but I didn't want to do that for my first technique breakdown video. I just want to put out a few kind of key things from my own technique and my own setup that I think are worthwhile. Not necessarily for everyone. We are all built differently. We all will have different leverages. My bench press and what's optimal for me will not be optimal for someone that is built entirely differently from me. So this might not be relevant to you, but it also could be. So this video, I break down my own setup, I break down my cues that I think work best for me, and I go through them as well. So one thing I think is worth saying as well, if you're a beginner lifter, don't try and implement everything at once. If you watch this video and you think, okay, yeah, I want to try this, that's brilliant, but don't try everything at the same time, because you won't know if you like it, because you won't know which part you like. There might be one thing that really benefits you and one thing that doesn't. You're better off trying one thing at a time and just gradually implementing different things, because also, as I mentioned in the video, the last thing you want to do when you're about to lift is have a checklist in your mind of different cues and different things you need to do before you do the actual lift. Like, lifting should become natural. Obviously, as a beginner, you're going to be thinking through technique more than an advanced lifter, but the goal should be to make these movements natural. So then when you load up for a PR, you're not overthinking it. You just know that you've got to do what you always do, you've got to execute the same as always. And that's why I think it's very important to just preface this by saying, do not overload yourself with cues and do not try everything at once. But hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you get something out of it, please let me know. And if you've got questions at the end, or if you've tried something, you're not sure if it's working, or if you want a bit of help behind what you're doing, just feel free to send me a message, send me an email, and I will do the best I can to help, and we can kind of talk through what might work for you as well. So hopefully this video you enjoy. Let me know what you think at the end, and yeah. Rather than just boring you with my training, I thought for once I would actually put some somewhat informative content out and just talk you through some of the cues that I like for bench and some of the cues that I find, generally speaking, will help most lifters. Just before I go through them, it's worth saying, firstly, don't obviously try every cue at once, because you won't know what works and what doesn't. If you're a newer lifter, I would say to give each thing a few sessions before you decide if you like it or not. Because, I mean, advanced lifters, generally speaking, will be able to tell if something feels good or not. Newer lifters, they might not be able to tell quite as quickly, but obviously it's just personal preference. There's nothing too crazy in here. Like, I don't like to bombard people with cues. I like to work on one thing at a time, ingrain one thing at a time to get to the point where they don't have to think about cues. You shouldn't be overloading your brain when you're about to lift, unless there's one specific thing that you've recently implemented that you think you need to be reminded of before you do your lift. You don't want like a checklist on your mind of what you've got to do before you're going to get your lift. Like, it should feel natural after time, okay? Okay, so first thing I'm going to talk through is what you wear when you bench. Now, we'll go through shoes in a moment, but just before that, I want to just talk about what top people wear when they bench, which probably seems kind of silly to a lot of people. I like to train in big baggy t-shirts. I feel more comfortable. It's just nicer, but I will not bench in one because it's just too slippy. Now, some people won't find this. It obviously depends on what bench you use, but unless you're benching on a decent, newer version of a comp standard bench, it's probably going to be a bit slippy. Obviously, if you don't find a problem with it, then don't change things. But for me, I cannot maintain my positioning in a baggy top when I bench, at least not on my home bench and not on the bench in the gym that I train at, which are comp standard benches as well. To combat that, obviously, if you do want to train in that, you can wrap resistance bands around the bench just to make it a bit more grippy. You can get those mats that you lay on it that make it more grippy. But the easiest way I've found to combat it is, at home, I'll just bench in my sports bra. In the gym, I'll wear a vest. If I get a vest, I'll bench in my sports bra. And leading up to comp, I will just bench in my singlet. I mean, in an ideal world, wearing your singlet every time you bench is probably more optimal because you will always be in that material at comp, and it's just a good habit to get in. And I would always recommend to people that they bench in their singlet leading into comp, because then the comp bench is probably going to be stickier than when you train on. So if you're having a good training cycle in your singlet on your normal training bench, on the day at comp, you're probably going to feel good when you bench. And that's just kind of that. It's really basic, but I think a lot of people don't register it. So next thing is shoes. So heels versus flats for bench. I'd say 90-95% of lifters just go for flats. If you can reach the floor comfortably and maintain good leg drive, then flats are going to be probably your best option. Typically speaking, flat shoes you can get with better grip on the bottom than you can heeled shoes as well, which obviously makes a difference. If you're using your leg drive properly, you need shoes that aren't going to be going anywhere. The other thing I think is worth mentioning though is if you are a shorter lifter and you struggle to reach the floor and heels help with that, then just go heels. If you can avoid using blocks on the day, then do, because they are likely to slip around the platform. But obviously for smaller lifters, that's not always an option. Some people need to use blocks. But yeah, so heels, typically for shorter lifters, they're not really needed for anyone that has longer legs that can reach the floor okay. I mean, if you want to try and if you prefer heels, obviously don't just change. But I would say for most people, for most lifters, flats on bench are fine. Okay, so one thing I think worth discussing is self-unracking the bar versus getting a hand off. My personal opinion is if you can, just self-unrack. Get in the habit of self-unracking. It is one less variable you have to worry about on comp day. Obviously, when you're training and you have the same people around you all the time, they're going to get used to exactly how you like that unrack to be, which is great for training. But then you're going to go to a comp and you're going to, you should be explaining to the spotter how you like the unrack. They will obviously do their best to get it right, but they essentially have 3 attempts to get that right for you. And if they don't get it right on the first one, you explain it slightly differently the next time. Obviously, again, they will do their best to get that right, but they are lifting off for everyone pretty much in that flight. They're not going to remember exactly how you wanted it. It's not something that they can pick up within 3 attempts. And also, if they do it slightly wrong in your opener, that's probably going to throw you off, especially if you're a newer lifter. So why not just take that variable out, learn to do it yourself? It won't be taking 2.5 off your bench. It won't take weight off your bench once you get in the habit and once you get used to it. It will probably add to your bench because it's an extra skill, you will get used to doing it. And again, it's one less variable. So I definitely opt for a self-unrack. Now, if you're a really technical bencher, you have a higher arch, you can't maintain your positioning without someone handing it to you, then I get it a bit more. But then there is also the issue of, if you are that technical of a bencher, a lot of your success on comp day is going to rely on that handoff, which is a lot of pressure on that person spotting you, and it's quite a large variable that is essentially out of your control. So if you can, just self-unrack. It will obviously take time to do, it will take time to master, but once you get used to it and you get yourself in the right position, it is definitely going to benefit you more than hinder you. One thing to be mindful of, and I will talk you through it as I set up, is when you do self-unrack, you will probably have to start higher up the bench. You will learn very quickly where you need to set up so that you obviously don't set up too high that you flip the rack, but too low that you have to drag it over yourself, because that would be a waste of energy. Like when I unrack myself, obviously sometimes, especially training at home, because the bench and stuff isn't great, the flooring isn't great, I do struggle to get myself in the perfect position. But typically speaking, and when I get on comp benches, I literally just pop out the rack, I'm in position, bench, rack. It's so simple. It is literally just a slight pop to get it out of the rack, and then you're in position. You don't have to drag it over, minimal energy, and it allows you to really get a good feel of the weight before you bench it. So that is why I like a self-unrack. What I'll do now is I will start setting up and I will just talk you through what I'm doing as I go. There's obviously lots of little things in this. I don't expect people to do them all. It's just some ideas and some things that I think are worth talking about, especially for newer lifters. Obviously, more advanced lifters, I would expect to know all of this already. But if you don't, doesn't matter. Just give it a go, see what you can implement, see what works for you. Other thing to address before I talk you through my actual setup is just grip width on the bar. Grip width is a personal preference. There's not a right or wrong way to do it. Maximum grip allowed in comp is index finger on the ring in the knurling. You've got to make sure that's covered. You can't go any wider than that.
So that's something worth mentioning. And typically, if you have a higher arch and you want a shorter range of motion, you will probably opt for a max width grip. But depending on how you're built, where your leverage, what your leverages are, what you prefer, you don't have to go max width. So I used to always do max width, but I have found actually since the new bench rule came in, I have to be a bit careful because I tuck my elbows a lot when I bench. And so I have found that actually bringing my grip in just one finger, so my middle finger is now on that ring, is a nice kind of compromise. So it looks ever so slightly deeper, which is all I needed. Like, I don't have a massive arch, so that's enough for me. And also I get better tricep activation with it slightly closer. It's obviously not a massive difference, so it probably is more mental than actually making a difference in strength, but for me that's what works. But don't feel like you have to go max width just because that's what people typically do. If you have a higher arch and you want a shorter range of motion, you probably will go wider, and you don't want to go too close because that is just an unnecessary amount of range of motion. The only time I would say to people to go slightly closer is if they're dealing with shoulder problems. Typically, the wider you go, the more pressure that's probably going to put on your shoulders. But there's also ways to combat that if you're not necessarily setting your shoulders right in the first place. So what we'll go through then is I will go through my setup and I'll talk you through it as I'm doing it. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is find where I want my feet to be for optimal leg drive for me. So I actually prefer having my feet slightly further forward than what they are when I train at home, because where the mat ends is pretty much where I want my feet to be. Obviously, I can't do that when I'm at home, so I do have to get used to having my feet slightly closer to me. But I'll be honest, it's not something that's ever really bothered me because near a comp, I tend to go back to training in the gym anyway. So that's absolutely fine. So I'll find where I want my feet to be. And now, because I have longer hair, I like to have my hands on the side of the rack when I'm about to set up, just so that I can get into my, like, higher on my shoulders, onto my traps for my positioning. If you don't have that issue and you are comfortable doing it like this, what I would always recommend is just setting your grip exactly where you want it, and then sliding down the bench, coming up, pushing through your feet, but not moving where your feet were. So just coming up onto your toes, feet flat when your eyes are under the bar, and go from there. But because my hair typically tends to then slide down, I then find it really annoying, for one, but also it's more slippy underneath me and I struggle to hold my position as much when my hair is down there. So because of that, I set my feet, hands on the side, pushing into the rack. I come up higher. I almost tuck my hair out of the way, shoulders into the bench, and I just get myself in line with the bar. Now for me, in my own racks, I like my eyes to be pretty much level with the bar, slightly behind it if anything. And that for me works so that I don't clip the rack and I don't have to then pull it over myself. So what I'll then do, set my hands into where I want them. I will drive my neck into the bench this whole time. My legs are burning because I am pushing into the floor with my feet. Like, I can feel my quads doing the work. I won't grip the bar tightly, so I start with my finger over the ring, hands loosely gripping the bar. I will bring it up and over into where I want it for my start position. Slowly dip my bum onto the bench, keeping that leg drive. My quads are on fire. Then, as I'm about to do the descent,
As from now on, we're no longer together. You want me.
what I will do is I will just slightly engage my lats, bring it down to my chest, and press up. Now, one other cue that I think has massively helped me with my bench, it's kind of hard to do when you've just got the bar. Like, I normally need weight on the bar to be able to actually feel this and engage this. But as I'm bringing the bar down to my chest, I am bringing my chest up to the bar. It is not a flat like movement. My chest is coming up to the bar. So I will talk through it as I do it. But essentially, I get myself in position like before, fingers on the ring, gently holding the bar, pushing my hand into the bar, unrack, set position. Obviously, you have to have your elbows locked before you get the start command. I will take a big brace in, bring that air to my chest, and then my chest is coming up to the bar, my ribs are coming up to meet the bar, and then I press. You shouldn't be fully, like, you're driving through your feet the entire time, and as you bring that bar down, your chest should feel like it is meeting the bar. The bar isn't meeting your chest your chest is coming up to the bar. Obviously with that, keep your bum against the bench. It can be quite easy to then bring your bum up and your hips off the bench, and you don't want that. But one of the most important things I think within all of that, with the leg drive side of it, is making sure that you're driving through your feet the whole time. Like, bench is not just an upper body exercise. Like, my quads burn just through my setup, and that's how you want it to be, because that's when you know your legs are going to be doing some of the work. And that is, I think, something that people don't utilize enough. But those are probably the main things for bench. When I said about driving my neck into the bench and keeping my neck long, a cue that used to help me with that before it became kind of like an instinct is keeping my chin to my chest as I'm setting up. So I'll quickly demonstrate that. But essentially, when I am in this position and I'm about to unrack, so I'll do my normal unrack, bring it over, and as I am bringing my bum down to meet the bench, I am keeping my chin tucked into my chest. And that just helps me keep a really long neck. My shoulders haven't moved since I set up. Everything feels really solid. My legs are working. My upper body is ready. And that is a really solid position for me to start. And then big brace. Bring your chest to meet the bar and up. And that's what it is. There's obviously, it's not the simplest thing to get with bench press. It's definitely, apart from maybe sumo, the most technical lift. But once you get it and you start to feel these things working, it's just going to be an upward trajectory from there. Obviously, you will stall eventually, but it will make a huge difference, especially for beginner lifters that are still figuring out their technique.
Right, but they don't care. Oh, I'm getting lost in the commotion, and the sound is way too loud. 'Cause I'm not the city girl I thought I.
Okay, so one thing I don't think I explained in enough detail when I'm watching this back is why I set up so highly on my traps. So the reason for this, the main reason for this, and the main reason I recommend this, obviously everyone is built differently. Some lifters will be better off in a more flat back position, but essentially being higher up on your traps takes a lot of the pressure off of your shoulders. So when you're bringing that bar down to your chest, if you're not high enough on your traps, that weight will be pushing into your shoulders. And if you see someone flat benching from the side, a lot of bodybuilders with the way they bench, you will be able to see that that shoulder joint just isn't overly supported. And the volume and the frequency that powerlifters tend to bench, it doesn't, in my mind, seem worth the risk of, it's just wear and tear, I guess is the best way to explain it. It's more beneficial, and also I think you can get more pressing power. Your back is more engaged by being higher up on your traps. Obviously, the goal doesn't need to be an absolutely huge arch, but I just think the goal should be to protect your shoulders, which will in turn involve some level of arching for the majority of lifters. But obviously, it's not a one-size-fits-all. The cues that work for me won't necessarily work for anyone else. If I can take away any or give anything from this video, my favorite cue of all of them is probably just chest to bar. Bringing your chest up to meet the bar is so important, and it's been an absolute game changer for my bench and for lifters that I've coached as well. So I think that is everything that I wanted to cover in this video. Now, thank you if you've made it this far, and if you have any questions on any of it, please feel free to just get in touch. My Instagram and email address are both down below, and please like, subscribe, comment if you enjoyed it.